I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. I urge the Rules Committee to grant a prompt rule for the House's consideration of both the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find former President of the United States, William J. Clinton, in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find former Secretary of State Hillary R. Clinton in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with the subpoena duly issued by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Subpoenas are not mere suggestions. They carry the force of law and require compliance. Former President Clinton and former Secretary Clinton were legally required to appear for a deposition before the House Oversight Committee. They refused, and actions have consequences. Last July, Republicans and Democrats on the House Oversight Committee's Federal Law Enforcement Subcommittee unanimously approved a voice vote, a motion to subpoena former President Clinton and former Secretary Clinton for depositions as part of our investigation into the federal government's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell criminal cases. On August 5th, I issued subpoenas to them. The testimonies of President Clinton and Secretary Clinton are critical to understanding Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking network and the ways he sought to curry favor and influence to shield himself from scrutiny. In fact, then Secretary of State Clinton would have signed off on the annual Trafficking in Persons report. In 2010, under Secretary Clinton's tenure, that report began covering trafficking within the United States. Given her service as Secretary of State, she could provide firsthand information about the federal government's efforts to combat international sex trafficking. Their testimony may also inform how Congress can strengthen laws to better combat human trafficking. Since issuing the subpoenas, the Oversight Committee has acted in good faith. We've offered flexibility on scheduling. We've tried to accommodate. The response we received was not cooperation, but defiance, repeated delays, excuses, and obstruction. President Clinton and Secretary Clinton claimed to have been treated unfairly because the Oversight Committee accepted written statements under penalty of law from former U.S. Attorneys Gonzalez, Holder, Lynch, Sessions, and Garland, as well as former FBI Director Comey. Those written statements were accepted because none of those officials recalled any information relevant to the Epstein investigation, nor could we find any evidence that they did have personal relationships with Epstein. By contrast, the Oversight Committee required in-person testimony from former U.S. Attorney General Barr and former U.S. Secretary of Labor and U.S. Attorney Acosta, both Republicans, because they possessed information directly relevant to the investigation. The Clintons had documented relationships with Epstein and Maxwell, including President Clinton's trips with Epstein and Maxwell, evidenced by numerous photographs, flight log records, wedding invitations, and other materials. We repeatedly informed the Clintons' attorneys that a written statement would not be sufficient. The subpoenas required a deposition. Federal courts have consistently held that witnesses may not impose their own conditions upon the manner of congressional inquiry. Yet President Clinton and Secretary Clinton attempted to do exactly that, submitting a brief, bulleted written statement that was neither comprehensive nor responsive to the Oversight Committee's many unanswered questions. No person, not a former president or a private citizen, may willfully defy a duly issued congressional subpoena without consequence. And there can be no doubt that this bipartisan congressional subpoena was lawful and duly issued, as Ranking Member Garcia confirmed for the record during the committee's markup. The Clintons have flatly refused to appear at all, despite repeated warnings that the Oversight Committee would move forward with contempt proceedings. 2 weeks ago, the Oversight Committee voted on a bipartisan basis to hold both President Clinton and Secretary Clinton in contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with their subpoenas. President Clinton must be held accountable for his actions. Secretary Clinton must be held accountable for her actions. The Rules Committee and the full House must take this opportunity to uphold Congress's investigative authority. And we must do so to demonstrate to the American people that justice is applied equally to everyone, regardless of position, pedigree, or prestige. I also urge the Rules Committee to grant prompt rule for Representative Gill's House Joint Resolution 142, disapproving the action of the District of Columbia Council and approving the D.C. Income and Franchise Tax Conformity and Revision Temporary Amendment Act of 2025. As I've said many times before this committee, Congress has the constitutional right to review legislation passed by the D.C. Council under the D.C. Home Rule Act. It also has authority to block such legislation. In this case, it should do just that. In December this past year, the D.C. Council enacted, without the mayor's support, legislation that blocks corresponding tax relief for D.C. residents and businesses that is afforded them at the federal level by the Working Families Tax Cut Act. These reforms provide much-needed tax relief for both individuals and businesses, relief that keeps more of Americans' money where it belongs, in their pockets. However, the D.C. Council has cherry-picked pieces of these federal tax reforms and decided to just ignore the application in the local tax code. The tax provisions they have chosen not to implement in the D.C. tax code include no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security for senior citizens, no tax on auto loan interest. This hurts seniors and hardworking American families, and that's just the start of it. They've also cut various tax credits for D.C. local businesses, including research and development and manufacturing incentives, stifling them from growing their local economy. The House must swiftly exercise its constitutional responsibility to oversee the District of Columbia and stop this misguided legislation from going into effect. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to unite in the support of D.C. taxpayers and businesses and support this necessary resolution of disapproval. Again, I ask the Rules Committee to grant a prompt rule for the House's consideration of these measures, and I welcome the committee's questions. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. Mr. Walkinshaw, can you hold on just 1 second?
Sure.
I can't figure out where that pounding noise is coming from. No. I'm sure it's distracting to me. I don't want it to be distracting to you all. We thought it might be coming from your mics. That's why I wanted